Hi, and welcome back to Documentary Films, Lecture 7, Part 2 of 2. Modern documentary filmmaking. First, I'm going to talk about why Dave and I both think we're living in the golden age of documentary filmmaking. And then we're going to talk about Robert Drew and the cinema verite movement, D.A. Pennebaker, Michael Moore, and Ken Burns. So, why would Dave and I say something so bold as we're living in the golden age of documentary filmmaking? Many reasons. First of all, technology has made documentary filmmaking cheaper than ever. What you used to spend on 1 week of rental for both shooting equipment and editorial time and an editor can now buy you just about everything you need to make a documentary film, like a prosumer camera, and of course you yourselves already have Final Cut Pro on your computers. Then there's the fact that there are so many TV channels now, all needing programming. Again, documentary-style filmmaking is fairly inexpensive. Think about channels like Discovery, History, Travel, Animal Planet. And let's be clear, we're not considering reality filmmaking documentary filmmaking, although they do employ documentary techniques. Also, video rentals. You just don't get a movie on the DVD anymore. They have additional footage, making ofs, behind the scenes footage, and all these are documentary style extras. And then of course we have Michael Moore, who proves to the studios that documentary filmmaking can be extremely profitable. Whether you like him or not does not matter. He has the 2 top grossing documentary films of all time. And then, of course, the expansion of film festivals have opened even more avenues of exhibition for documentaries. Early on in film festivals, documentaries were always a large part of it and still are today. And then we have Robert Drew and Associates. Drew developed what he called direct cinema, which later became known as cinema verite. Once again, the French have named a movie technique. And what this meant to Drew was no voice of God narration like we heard in the Parle Rents movies, no music to influence the audience. But of course, keep in mind that I think a lot of people think documentary filmmaking that inherently it is the truth. And that's really not what documentary filmmaking is. Even when you try to be as objective as possible, once you've chosen a lens, a camera angle, you've already subjected your opinions on things. He also wanted the images to speak for themselves, hence the no voice of God narration and no influence of music for the audience. So how was he able to achieve this? Well, several ways. Thanks to technologies that were made possible during World War II, such as 16 millimeter gauge film. Now, not that World War II gave us 16 millimeter gauge film, but prior to World War II, 16 millimeter gauge film was considered to be amateur, and a lot of people did their home movies on them. After World War II, 16 millimeter film got a reputation for being a professional film stock. Also, the development of Nagra Sync sound equipment helped this movement along. Faster film stocks and the zoom lens, all these made cinema verite possible and were all an outcropping of World War II. We heard Leni Riefenstahl talk about a 600 millimeter lens that had never been made or used before in the filming of Olympia. Again, you could get close in on your characters and be far away and catch them off guard. That was the whole trick. And this Drew was very fortunate in that his first example of this type of filmmaking, Primary, was actually the first film in which the sync sound camera moved freely with the characters throughout a breaking story. And he also had a very charismatic subject matter in JFK, of course. And this was about the JFK Humphrey primary for the Democratic ticket. The 3 Drew films on JFK are a history of his years from young senator to president to fallen hero and the beginning of the cinema verite movement. Crisis is about the desegregation of the schools, a big time in our nation's history. And of course, Faces of November, about his assassination and his widow, Jackie O. Let's now listen to D.A. Pennebaker on the making of Primary.
After people that normally stood at podiums and preached to you, that we'd actually seen them walking around the streets And especially Kennedy, who just looked so young and his hair blowing in the wind. We made an actor out of him. That's what he liked. Time Life wanted to, Bob Drew was an editor there, and Ricky and Drew went and talked to Kennedy, and he allowed us to film during the Wisconsin primary. And that was what primary was, about the Wisconsin, about Hubert Humphrey and Jack Kennedy. By then, we'd set out to figure out what kind of equipment we'd need to do this program that Life had in mind, which was bringing a kind of candid filmmaking into journalism, the way they had with the still camera. Having that as the guide and making stories about real people. It meant that the filmmaking was present always in real time with the event.
All right, so why do I have D.A. Pennebaker commenting on Robert Drew? Well, because Pennebaker, along with Richard Leacock, when they talk about Richard, were cameramen on this project for Robert Drew, and their work was heavily influenced by him. So D.A. Pennebaker actually becomes the godfather of the concert film, and his first big hit was a movie called Don't Look Back on Bob Dylan. And the clip I'm about to show you is not on Dylan himself, but rather Joan Baez. And what I love about this clip is how it really captures a moment. As a matter of fact, a bit of a humiliating, humbling moment for a journalist that might not have been able to have gotten caught had the cinema verite style not been used. You know, if you have lights and craft service tables and jennies and grip trucks, you bring a lot of attention to yourself. But with this new technology and this new methodology, you just blend it into the entourage. Let's take a look.
We publish these things, you know. You'll shake you know. Your name, please.
Joan Baez.
Joan.
B-A-E-Z.
Oh, truth. I didn't recognize you. I'm sorry.
Good.
Nice to see you. I've been looking for you all day.
So how wonderful. Here he is standing right in front of the woman he's looking for all day and doesn't even recognize her. You got to love it. But again, because of the methodology of the fly on the wall type of photography, they were able to capture a moment like this. This movie also sort of documents the estranged and downfall of the relationship between Dylan and Baez. Great movie. We have it in the library when you get here. And Pennebaker went on, of course, before Woodstock, there was Monterey Pop. And it was the first time people actually, filmmakers got right up there on the stage. We, could see close-ups of Hendrix playing the guitar, his fingers on the neck of the guitar. And then he made a documentary, The War Room, about the Clinton campaign, and Al Franken, God Spoke, in 2006. And continues. You can Google him. He still has a company. Him, I believe it's Pennebaker Hattagus Pictures or Hattius, and they're still around making cinema verite movies. And then we have Michael Moore, again a very polarizing character. Some people love him, some people hate him. It really doesn't matter. His first hit was with Roger and Me quite some time ago, and it really struck a nerve, evidently, with American audiences. So much so that it really struck more of a nerve with the studios, because what the studios realized is, even though he was controversial, he was making these movies for relatively low budget, and yet comes in at the two top grossing documentaries of all time with Fahrenheit 9/11 and Bowling for Columbine. And of course he continues to be a very profitable filmmaker, very against the grain, again very polarizing. Either you love him or you hate him, doesn't matter. He makes a lot of money for the studios and will continue to make movies as long as he brings in the cash. And it's because of filmmaker like Michael Moore that studios open their purse strings for this genre of filmmaking, leading us into the golden age of documentaries with such movies as Super Size Me by Morgan Spurlock. And of course we have An Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore. Now, Inconvenient Truth, not the greatest film in the world by a long shot. It's really sort of just a documenting of a PowerPoint presentation by Al Gore, but Al Gore, Schmal Gore, Vice President, Schmice President, doesn't matter. The fact that the studio thought they could make a lot of money on this got Al Gore his movie. Same deal with Morgan Spurlock. If they didn't think they could, I mean, they went up against McDonald's, a huge corporation. It could have really been a bad thing all around, because the end result is not exactly in McDonald's favor, and yet it gets made. And then we have Ken Burns. It's said that more Americans get their history from Ken Burns than any other source, and I strongly believe that. In 1981, his movie Brooklyn Bridge, documentary about the Brooklyn Bridge, was nominated for an Oscar. And then, of course, he has a constant distribution exhibition deal on PBS where his stuff gets shown. His most recent, The War. We have several of these in the library here. And we even have, if you look in iMovie, there's an effect called the Ken Burns effect. And that's when you take a still picture and either zoom in and then slowly zoom out, or vice versa, or you pan the still photograph. Basically, you're animating stills, because a lot of the stuff like the Civil War, of course, there's no footage. So he had to use photographs, and really just a prolific filmmaker. So some of the things we discussed in these documentary lectures or video lessons is the first big documentary hit in America was Nanook of the North. However, because many people were faking documentaries, they fell out of favor with the audiences. At the time, there was yellow journalism. Pulitzer, Hearst were all planting stories for each other to print, and then they'd go, aha, that's a fake, that's a false story, you didn't fact check. And people were even faking documentaries, instead of having Teddy Roosevelt actually, charging up San Juan Hill. It was like, well, hell, he's back in the States, let's just do it in New Jersey. And people got hip to this, and that's, documentaries fell out of favor very quickly after that. And then we have John Grierson, who coins the term documentary, begins making films for the British Post Office, and eventually starts the National Film Board of Canada. And then we have Parr Lawrence and Leni Riefenstahl, who shot documentaries about governments that funded the documentaries, hence they were propaganda, and a very ironic relationship there between Parr and Leni. Leni Riefenstahl also innovates how we shoot sporting events to this day. The techniques used during Olympia, the 1938 Berlin Olympics, just brilliant. Technologies invented during World War II led the way for the cinema verite style that was inspired by John Grierson and cemented by Robert Drew. And then we have D.A. Pennebaker, the godfather of the concert documentary, who's still very much a viable filmmaker today. And of course, we talked about living in the golden age of documentary filmmaking. There's just so many TV stations out there, cable network, that need programming, and documentary is the cheapest way to go. And then, of course, Michael Moore really helps usher in the golden age of documentary filmmaking by not only being provocative, but being extremely profitable. And then Ken Burns becomes the most prolific documentarian, and his films become a source for which people learn about historic events. So that concludes the lectures on documentary filmmaking. Thank you.